Okay everyone, so welcome again to another one of our lessons. And now that we are done with our sign up form here that redirects us back to our main file or index.html, I want to go and try to create a simple PHP file that will contain not only a simple PHP code but also some HTML elements that we have previously used. As to what we've learned before, we can have PHP files that will contain text, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together with the PHP code. And it will be executed on the server side and then will be returned to the browser as plain HTML. And that's the goal for this lesson so that we can at least have a way for us to use our sign in form here. We will be building a PHP file. So right now, if I try to type here, you would see if I submit this, it goes to nowhere and file not found. And another thing that we should be aware of here is that this is an enter email or username, and this should not be accepting plain text. And here, if we try to type anything here, you would see that the content that we are typing here is being masked because our input type is correct and we use the input type with the assigned value of password. Now, what we want to do here is to not allow plain text to be entered in our email input type field. So let's go to our code editor and let's try to correct that. So that is because if we try to look at our input class email here, the type that we have assigned as a value pair for the type attribute is text. And for us to be able to correct the mistake that I've made in our previous lesson, we will need to go and change it to input type email. And if we go back to our code here, and if we try to go and enter a random text here, you would see that there's an appearing tooltip here. Please enter an email address. And here we still have the password working. And you would see here that it's turning red. The border is turning red. And it's telling us that we should be placing an email address at gmail.com. Now let's try to submit this. Of course, it will be redirecting to another page. However, we don't have any welcome.php here. That's the one that we specified in our code. If you remember, let's go back to our code editor here. That's the value that we entered into our action form, and that's the welcome.php file. So let's try to build a simple welcome.php file for our exercise, as an exercise for this lesson. Now let's try to go and create our first PHP file here that we named welcome.php. We can see here a notification saying that cannot validate since no PHP executable is set. And we need to go to the setting, configure notification here for us to set the php.validate.executable path and configure it. So don't worry too much about this for now, but just to give you some information, I actually opened up here the documentation of Visual Studio Code here, and you would see that here's the instructions about what is this issue that we're encountering, that it points to the PHP executable on the disk, and we need to set this if the PHP executable is not yet on the system path. So this can be happening mainly because we haven't installed PHP yet. We will need to install PHP, or if you already have a local web server running, like for example, in my case, I'm using XAMPP here. I can run the XAMPP control panel here, and then I can I can type the code here that we have here and direct it to the directory from where the php.exe file is located. Okay, so that's one of the ways that we can go and solve this issue here. But for now, let's not yet do that. Let's just focus first on building our welcome.php file here. And perhaps I'll be running you through on how to do that in future lessons, okay? So at least you'll be aware on how to do this if you will be proceeding to learning PHP in the near future, especially if you're going to move forward to server-side programming for web development, okay? Now let's try to go first and write our markup here, and you would see that we can use HTML markup inside of our PHP file here. So what I would want to do here is to type here welcome rod for the title. Now let's go inside of our body element here and create a header. And let's try to go here, type a div with class header, and inside of that I would want to have a div with class header heading, and then inside of that I would want to have an h1 with a class header heading 1 that will contain text welcome there, and then we would want to also have another div here with a class logout and a link that will be redirecting us to our index.html. And then let's type here log out. Now let's go to our sign in HTML here and get some code here that we can use. So again, the universal selector, if you remember, let's go and insert style, backslash style, save that, and then let's go and have our body selector and give it a font family of, if you remember, we used Chewy and cursive here. Now let's go and try to first check out our browser here. Let me open our file here, go to our, and let's see how that will look now. Now we have our welcome.php and we now have our welcome text here that we have specified inside of our code editor here. So if you remember, we have our header and we have the div for the logout. Okay, so let's go back to our code here and then let's go and apply set some font size for the whole body of the document, and I want it to be font size of 20 pixels. And let's go and select the header div here, and I would want to change the background color to RGB 1684 211, height of 20 VH, color white, text align center. So let me just correct this. I want this to be 20 VH. And then let's go back to our browser here and see what that will look like. Okay, so we now have our welcome text here and our logout link here. So if we go click on that, we get redirected to our main page or the index.html file that we have. So now we are able to move around in our different pages. So let's go back to our code editor here, and let me just go close this and then open it up once again, and let me open our file. And we do have this issue here. So in the next lesson, I'm going to go and run you through on how we can go and try to remove this issue here. Just take note that you will need to install PHP in your computer, local computer, so that we can go and solve that issue that is popping out in your Visual Studio Code once you create a PHP file. This is not a PHP course, but I just wanted to introduce it to you so at least you'll have an idea on what PHP can do, especially in generating dynamic page content. It can create, open, read, write, delete, and close files on the server side. So it's really important that you are aware of what PHP is about So at least you'll have some basic information about it, and you will be able to go and start reading and looking into the documentation about what PHP is all about. Okay, so that will be all for this lesson, and thank you, and see you on our next lesson.